Things just got shaken up in the world of broadcasting. And no, I'm not talking about our shiny new drops. ESPN doled out a lot of money to Troy Aikman to revamp their Monday Night Football broadcast. Aikman has been with Fox for 20 years, but will now be pocketing 18 mil a season on his new deal. Troy will not be the only big name on the move. His former partner in crime, Joe Buck, is on an expiring contract, and legend Al Michaels is a free agent. Mike Tirico will be filling in for him on Sunday Night Football moving forward. Reportedly, Michaels is the prime target for Amazon as it becomes the exclusive home of Thursday Night Football. However, before signing a new deal, Michaels wants to know he has a good partner. Enter Kirk Herbstreit, as Amazon can sign Herbie while allowing him to continue covering games for ESPN for college football. Other names getting thrown around are Greg Olson, retired Saints coach Sean Payton, Kyle from the news and rumors at this point. Who's been the biggest winners? Who has been the biggest losers of this announcer shakeup? Do you think it enhances these respective broadcasts?
Well, enhances the broadcast is another question, but I will say the big winners are the NFL's 32 owners who I think I could do more NFL than baseball. It'd be close, but I think I can get more NFL owners than baseball. I'll think about that later, but even still with the NFL television shakeup is you get to have your corporate partners spending exorbitant amounts of money on broadcasters, and ultimately investing more money will lead to better products. Behind the scenes, the person who had been producing NBC's Sunday Night Football for, I believe, the past 8 years, I don't remember the person's name, but they got picked up by Amazon on this hiring cycle as well. So even behind the scenes, there are exorbitant amounts of money being spent on these NFL television broadcasts. It may not look that much visually different to us because they're not doing anything that's going to revolutionize the broadcast. It's really just getting the most qualified people who are already good at doing the broadcast that we're used to. And so getting those people in positions where they're going to different broadcast partners and large amounts of money being spent are going to be a win for the NFL. I don't know how it benefits Amazon to spend that much money other than just dipping into your profits. I don't know if it generates more revenue unless you're selling it to advertisers.
Come on, man. Jeff Bezos, he owns the world at this point. 18 million or 20 million, whatever he pays to Al Michaels, pocket change.
Fair enough. If you're cool with just having fun things instead of making money, which I'm totally in favor of that. I'm cool with you just spending shit tons of money.
Bezos has two gears. Can I go to space or can I own an NFL team? Right now, he can't own an NFL team. So he's doing the next best thing. He's trying to buy the NFL.
He could buy the NFL if he wanted to. He could buy all sports leagues and still have a lot of money left over. Even still, it's weird how the rich
lockout
Bezos is.
And baseball's lockout. Come on, Jeff Bezos, buy all 30 franchises. Go for it. Make our day.
How much would it cost to buy all of this? I think that would be something like in the NFL, probably like $100 billion plus maybe.
Well, hey, I posted that chart of like the last time NFL franchises were sold, and David Tepper, of course, bought the Panthers for about $2 billion. You estimate that every franchise would probably be about that much. 32 times 2, 64
well, Tepper
billion.
also only bought like 80% of the Panthers, I think.
You would probably say that more of those franchises are probably going to be like 4 billion at least, because that's what the Broncos are going to be estimated at this next time around. I'm sure there's going to be some outlier brands like the Cowboys are probably closer to 10 billion or something like that. I would say you're probably talking about close to 100 billion, which if you're, again, Jeff Bezos and you're a trillionaire, okay, you or your ex-wife can buy them.
That is true. Also, Apple getting into the game would be interesting. I know Apple has talked about trying to get into the sports streaming game as a way to boost Apple TV Plus. By the way, quietly, the more likely scenario is Apple just buying Disney. That's another thing that might happen in the next 3 or 4 years. And
Apple
then they have
buying
ESPN.
Disney. Well, and that's crazy to me because, well, Disney owns everything. Disney just bought Fox.
Yeah, but Disney is only worth, I believe, $70 billion right now, and Apple is worth $3 trillion. So it would be pocket change for them to buy the Disney Corporation.
It's like that Star Wars quote that there's always a bigger fish. That's exactly what's happening. There's always a bigger fish in this corporate environment that we're in. Going back to the broadcast themselves, I'm just happy for Monday Night Football because those games deserve a big game feel. And say what you want about Aikman and Buck. I've always been a huge defender of Aikman and Buck because to me, that broadcast is only slandered in the same way Nickelback is slandered by the internet. Someone on the internet told you hate it, so you hate it. and you hate Joe Buck because the internet said so and you're trying to form an opinion for yourself. No, Joe Buck's fine. Troy Aikman's fine. And Troy Aikman and Joe Buck always give that big game feel to any game that they broadcast. And I think that that's deserving of Monday Night Football because it's a standalone game that everyone in America tunes into, or every huge NFL fan tunes into, because the ratings will even show that. And I think it can only improve the product because, I'm going to say something controversial to a lot of people. I wasn't a big fan of the Manning cast. We kind of had this discussion off air. I wasn't a huge fan of it because the audio, everything the quality kind of varied from time to time. So I would just prefer if my typical broadcasters that I tune into were just good at what they're doing, because the Booger McFarlanes, Jason Witten era, everything past Gruden, which is funny because of all Gruden's faults. Gruden was the best thing they had, and losing Gruden killed that broadcast for a while.
John Gruden used to be the highest paid employee at ESPN for I think 4 or 5 years.
And knowing what they lost in his absence, I would say he was almost deserved.
Well, in hindsight, ESPN should have paid him more than the 10 million or 11 million a year the Raiders were offering him. Now, maybe he wanted to go coach the Raiders no matter what, but I believe his last year he made like $7.5 million to be Monday Night Football broadcaster. And now Troy Aikman's making $18 million a year.
And they wanted to pay Tony Romo that, and they wanted to also pay Peyton Manning that, but they weren't able to snag those fish. So they went after Fox and went after Troy Aikman. And I never thought Aikman was going to leave Fox. I thought that was just, he was there until he was done. So this was an incredible
Fox lowballed him was the reason why. Fox only offered him, I believe, $14 million a year.
And you wonder if it kind of goes back to the playoffs, because he did voice frustrations that he wasn't able to call the Cowboys and Niners game in the playoffs. And I was thinking that too. I'm like, how is this game not on Fox? It just seems right up Troy Aikman's alley. And he gets to have that pretty boy Tony Romo still his broadcasting gig.
Well, everyone wanted that game on the pick of the litter for the wild card weekend broadcast. Everyone wanted the 49ers Cowboys.
It still might be one of the highest rated games of the playoffs.
I would have to fact check that, but if you said it, I would believe it, because there are a lot of Dallas Cowboy fans. I think probably the highest rated one of wild card weekend would be my bet. But
for sure, hands down. But I think the only games that probably are higher rated are going to be the championship games and the Super Bowl. Maybe
I would say under
the
normal
Packers-Niners game might have been close, but I think for the most part, the Niners, when they're good, they have huge ratings. The Cowboys, when they're good, they have huge ratings. You combine those two franchises and you just have a monster of a ratings day.
Under normal circumstances, I agree with you. We just forget how ridiculous that divisional round weekend was, because Bills and Chiefs was like the highest rated non-championship / Super Bowl game
yes,
ever.
But you have to make that decision ahead of time. I know obviously you can get ratings throughout the course of a game, but a lot of people just made it a point. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch the Cowboys and Niners whenever those two brands go against each other. And again, you can fact check it. It's kind of hard to do research in show, but I'm 99% sure that is the case, that it was only trumped by the championship games and the Super Bowl.
Bringing it back to Buck and Aikman, because this relates to that point, is I don't really understand the appeal of people wanting a quote unquote standalone broadcast team, because Buck and Aikman were doing Thursday Night Football before, and they did the game of the week on Fox, which if it was a good game, which was maybe once every 3 weeks or so, where it's like one of those, you have to sit down and watch the Bucks versus the Saints, or you have to sit down and watch the Rams against the, I don't know, Packers, which I think that game might have actually been on CBS this year, but still, it's weird that people didn't want that.
I mean, I'll tell you why. It just, their voices, we're so used to seeing them come up in key spots in big games. It just adds like a different feel to it that you just don't get when you have, no disrespect to these guys because they're great at what they do, but like the B teams and the C teams of broadcasters that come in. When Buck and Aikman ended up doing Thursday Night Football, regardless of the game, it could have been the Jaguars versus the Eagles, and you would feel like this is a big game. This is a big primetime spot because those two were on it, and they at least had a little bit of fun with it. And they made the game feel more important than it is, which I think is a key role for those dynamics, being the color man, being the play-by-play guy. You just have to make each game feel important in its own right. And that's what ESPN has been lacking with their Monday Night Football broadcast. These games just all seem like throwaway games. And maybe in the grand picture of things, they are throwaway games, but you don't want the viewer to know that going in. You don't want the viewer to feel that during the game, You want someone that kind of makes them buy in to why they're watching the broadcast in the first place.
So I always was fascinated by this. Is it that those people have big game voices because they've always been calling big games? Or is it that they have big game voices because they were qualified to have big game voices?
It's probably a little bit chicken versus egg argument, because I'm sure that they didn't start that way. And Joe Buck, of course, had a little bit of an in, being that his father was a Hall of Fame level broadcaster himself. And Troy Aikman, people associate him with Super Bowls. So he's always going to be looked on more fondly than someone like Greg Olsen, who's a fine tight end, probably a Hall of Fame tight end, but not the quarterback of 3 Super Bowl champions. In the same way, Joe Buck, has called all these World Series, has called all these Super Bowls. So any new play-by-play guy is not going to be looked at in the same light that Joe Buck is, or be as famous as Joe Buck is. I'm sure there's that next generation of broadcasters that hates that these guys still are taking up all the shine. But at least for the casual viewer, I think that there is something to these guys having that role. And that also goes to Al Michaels. We haven't even talked about Al Michaels' side of the things. He's a free agent. He hasn't officially signed on for Amazon. He still can pair with Aikman, which would be just a huge ground shifting if he went to ESPN as well, because then you talked about also splitting up that dynamic duo of Buck and Aikman for Michaels and Aikman. And you kind of wonder, will they have chemistry? Chemistry is also going to be a big part of this, right? I mean, we're co-hosts here. We run this podcast together, and it'll be very hard for us to run this podcast if we had zero chemistry. So I'll be curious to see, does Aikman just pick up with Michaels where he left off with Buck? And that's just not a given sometimes. I mean, maybe Jason Witten could have been a great broadcaster. Maybe he could have been a great color guy.
No. I will end your sentence right there. No, Jason Witten is the worst broadcaster I have ever call games. It was terrible, and we should never do that again.
Are you saying you weren't thrilled with him pulling a rabbit out of his head?
Jason Witten was so bad at commentary, but he got the job because he was a white Dallas Cowboy. And ESPN was like, how do we replace John Gruden? White Dallas Cowboy? Nope. Boogermobile? Nope. Just getting the C college football team. It was actually fine. No one complained about Steve Levy and Brian Griese and Lou Riddick. They just were a broadcast team.
I would say the 3-man booth wasn't great. I prefer a 2-man booth, and maybe it's because I've just been raised by a 2-man booth my entire life, but 3-man booth, it just always sounds choppy. I mean, we've had guests on, we've talked with guests, and sometimes the big fear when you have guests on is, are we going to be talking over each other all the time? And I think that also kind of happened occasionally in their broadcast.
So that part's interesting too. And this brings back to the Joe Buck thing, because again, personally, I don't know the situation, but I don't understand why Joe Buck would leave Fox to go to ESPN, except for the news that I saw this week that NBC may be trying to buy Major League Baseball rights when their contract comes up, at which point, that changes the game of Joe Buck not only doesn't just have the NFL, he also doesn't have World Series anymore.
Well, I was listening to Al Michaels do an interview this week, and he was talking about why that was something he was very disappointed in. He wishes he could still call baseball games. And he was saying that he was really disappointed when NBC originally lost the ability to have baseball games. So you kind of wonder if that happened. Al's just sitting on the couch, like I said, he's a free agent now. NBC says, hey, we got baseball back. Does that persuade him to come back? I mean, that would be unfair to Mike Tirico, of course, who's been waiting for that job. But if I'm Al, I want to call baseball games. I want to continue calling big primetime football games. NBC's offering me, I'm guessing now the new market is close to 20 million. Why wouldn't I just go back with NBC if that happened?
Al Michaels is done with NBC as the way things stand right now. Al Michaels is 77 years old, but also they would have renewed Al Michaels around. They brought in Tirico to be the pass off. People still trust Mike to call big games. And it's a weird thing because he was the Monday Night Football guy for 9 years, and he kind of waited in between. But people still think of Mike Tirico as a big game broadcaster. And he has
a big game voice. I would say Tirico is great, and I'm perfectly fine with him taking over the Sunday night broadcast because I think him and Collinsworth will be a good duo. I think they're fine.
This is always difficult because I don't know what makes a big game voice. Like, for example, I don't usually pick and choose broadcasters all that much, but I love Brian Brian Anderson. Brian Anderson calling baseball and basketball is a great commentator. And I don't know if people think of him as a big game voice, but Brian Anderson is now the lead voice or second lead voice of the NBA and baseball.
And I might be biased here, but when it comes to baseball, I've been spoiled in the Bay Area with Kruk and Kipe for the Giants games. And then, of course, on the radio side of things, you have John Miller. So I always associate John Miller with big time baseball games. You just hear these guys and they just have that voice. I mean, we know it. Part of the thing that I always think back on why I was hesitant to do a podcast in the first place, I was like, is my voice good enough? That was just one thing that I always battled internally with myself. Is my voice good enough? And I listen to these guys and they just have it for me. I just, that you talk about the new format being like old school radio. Well, there's still people that like that. A little bit of nostalgia. Like people like your old time broadcaster impersonation.
You mean like this? You mean like the 1940s and when we had real men playing football and the old Ted Leitner from San Diego was calling games in the 1970s. Shout out to Uncle Ted. Uncle Ted retired last year. He was voice of San Diego sports for 45 years. Shout out to old Uncle Teddy. But
you just have Super Bowl winning quarterback just smoking cigars at halftime.
Len Dawson, I believe, is who you're going for there. Yes, Len Dawson just ripping a heater at halftime. Yeah. So this is something interesting for myself. Is I think that people are generally opposed to change, especially in institutions like sports. And again, these broadcast teams are going to change, but that's a product of the NFL wanted the broadcast teams to change. This is the same thing that's changing as all of this money comes into the NFL. I know the NFL has a lot of money, but the NFL has a lot more money now than they used to. And so this shakeup is the same thing that's happening in college football. Should these institutions be paying $20 million a year for broadcasters? No, they shouldn't, but they're going to do it. It's a fun lottery. Like you're going to put people together who maybe work, maybe don't. I know Buck and Aikman had great chemistry, and Al Michaels says glowing things about Chris Collinsworth, and they were institutions for really 15 years. Like other than the Tony Romo switch, which happened to work out incredibly for CBS, like other than that switch, there hasn't been any shakeup of broadcast teams in the NFL. And I think people are kind of freaked out by that because it's change and things that are unknown can be weird to people, but it's still some of the same voices.
You talked about 20 years, I mean, Al Michaels has been with Collinsworth since Madden.
Yeah, 2009 was when that switch happened. And then you have Aikman and Buck, 20 years. Jim Nantz took over for Greg Gumbel, I think in 2004. And then it was Phil Simms, and then it was Tony Romo. But this is like a shakeup of all of the teams. Like all of them are going to look and sound different.
I think it's also because we don't think of our broadcasters like we think about our players just shifting teams left and right. The fact that we have a little extra added free agency that we didn't even know about. Here we are thinking we're going to talk about players moving teams, and we get to see our broadcasters moving teams.
It is the exact same thing that happened last offseason in college football, which is massive amounts of money changed the game. Now, it's only going to change it one time. Once the teams are set, they're probably going to be set for the next 5 or 6 years. But this is the offseason where everyone's moving quickly in musical chairs to make their changes. CBS is good. CBS was ahead of the curve on this one. They got Nantz, they got Romo. They're good for the next 20 years. Fox is going to change everything up. NBC just changed theirs up. Amazon wants to get in this game. ESPN wants to get in this game. Apple's going to get in this game eventually. And
if I had to name a loser, I think Fox right now is looking like the loser in this whole exchange, because losing Aikman, I feel, is losing like one of their big guys. And I'm hearing, like I mentioned, Greg Olsen is someone they talked about to pair with Buck. And we'll see if Greg Olsen does fine in that position. I mean, he's done okay with what he's done so far, so I don't think he'll be bad. It's just like, how is he going to have chemistry with Buck? That's going to be the big question going into that one. Or Sean Payton. If Sean Payton really does want to do broadcasting and they pair him with Buck, that's their declaration that they think Sean Payton's going to work.
I heard the recent news was that Sean Payton might be going to the desk for the Fox pregame team.
That would make more sense, because there's also been instances, I mean, we talked about it with Jason Witten, players, coaches, they don't always translate to the broadcast booth. It's not a given. Randy Moss didn't translate to the broadcast booth either. Joe Montana didn't. Bill Walsh didn't. It's not a shoo-in that you're just going to be a legendary broadcaster just because you either played or coached the game.
No, because you actually have to be good at it. None of these people are. This is the other funny part about this. None of these people are qualified for any of these jobs. Charles Davis, who is the second guy at CBS, he spent 20 years doing TV broadcasts to become the number 2 person at Fox and then the number 2 person at CBS. Like, Troy Aikman got the job because he's a white Dallas Cowboy quarterback. Like, none of these people are qualified for any
Dallas
of these
Cowboy
jobs.
Quarterback, but it's semantics.
It's the equation, right? It's Dallas Cowboys in your broadcasting booth. It's faces of people that you know. That's why ESPN brought Jason Witten into retirement, just so he could do that.
That's why NBC wants Drew Brees to work out as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah, Drew Brees is the same idea. The famous guy, say nothing quarterback. And Drew Brees is not interesting at all as a broadcaster, but it's the same reason why Tony Romo got the number 1 CBS job without any qualification for the job. He'd never been a broadcaster before in his life, and he got the number 1 job at CBS. And the same reason that
we lucked into Romo being good at it.
Yeah, exactly. We lucked into Romo being a very good broadcaster, and they want to throw money at Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning just doesn't want to do it unless it's on a Zoom call with his brother. And
Peyton might not be good. I mean, we assume Peyton's going to be good because we just see this charismatic guy. He's got a few jokes. He's funny. He might not be good at like that particular format, that Kohlerman and that play-by-play guy. That just might not be suited for him. And I think maybe we've overestimated that. I know I was on team. I want Peyton Manning in the booth, but maybe Peyton is just trying to be upfront and honest with us that he doesn't believe he'll be good at it.
Peyton Manning's also too good for that because Peyton Manning's worth like $250 million. And why would you want to do actual work? Because those jobs are really hard. Like, I know that people I know people think that it's coming on there.
Things. I can't remember who I was hearing to on an interview was say it's like the easiest job in the world. You show up, maybe you know some of the players, maybe you don't. Either way, you get a spreadsheet of all the players on game day, and then you can figure it out. How good you are really depends, I guess, on how much work you're willing to put in. I guess like anything, because you could just be one of those guys that just shows up on game day and just reads the roster and you're like, okay, I'm good. But you might not reflect that in your broadcast. Actually putting
I should clarify that. I should clarify that. Being the play-by-play person is incredibly difficult. I don't understand how Joe Buck does 13 games in 15 days. Like, it's ridiculous that Joe Buck had that schedule during October.
Okay, I'm with you. Like I said, internet, you're a little too harsh. Joe Buck is fine. Leave Joe Buck alone. Joe
Buck is a consummate professional. Chris Collinsworth does a lot of work for this stuff. Like, Chris Collinsworth spent a lot of time buying Pro Football Focus and learning stats. Kirk Herbstreit's the same way, which brings it to the Amazon part of this, which is incredible. I think Fox is a loser, but Fox is going to be fine. Like, I don't think that Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, as great as they are, Joe Buck and anyone, I think, is going to be fine. Troy Aikman's not special to me in that way. He just has a voice that we're used to now. Amazon's in a weird place because Amazon's just going through the Rolodex of famous people. They tried Peyton Manning. They tried Troy Aikman. They tried Sean McVay. They tried Sean Payton. They've gone through the Rolodex and they're just running out of people to do their Thursday Night Football broadcast.
Amazon, just saying, John Gruden is a free agent right now.
No, NFL's got approval on all of this stuff, but that would be fun.
I told you Bezos will buy them. Bezos will buy them.
And by the way, Amazon, to get into this game, had the simulcast of Thursday Night Football for the past couple of years. And they did Beth Mullins and Hannah Storm doing the broadcast before. It's only now that they're in the game as like the exclusive broadcasting partner that the NFL has instructed them to go get the big people. Because I watched 2 of those Amazon broadcasts one time. I think one of them was for that 49ers and Cardinals game that had like CJ Beathard or some shit. But anyways, like, that broadcast was fine. It sounded like a C broadcast or a B broadcast. I would think that someone would want to try like Gus Johnson as a broadcaster because Gus Johnson does that college football-y voice thing. And obviously they want Al Michaels to be the person for the Amazon broadcast. And, you know, Al Michaels wants to know who his play-by-play person is, but they're just going through the Rolodex and they can't find anyone who's just a big splashy name. Now there's a total overqualification of great broadcasters out there. Go get Charles Davis from CBS to do it, and you're going to have a great broadcast. It's just Amazon is kind of being instructed by the NFL to just get big names. And I don't know whether that's a win or that's a lose. I think it's just the idea of the unknown is appealing to someone. Because if I don't know, who are we talking about? If Sean McVay is terrible at broadcasting, well, you can just fire him and get another one in there. Like, you just keep trying unknowns until you hit on a Tony Romo. But like with the ESPN one, no one complained about the ESPN broadcast. No one had great things to say about it, but no one complained about Lou Riddick and Brian Griese and Steve Levy because they had chemistry. They'd been doing college football together for 6 years. They were a really good team. Just no one paid attention to it. And I don't know. I guess the NFL wants people like us to have conversations about their broadcast teams to generate publicity for the NFL.
Right. This is just typical off-season banter, and I'm okay with it because we've managed to stretch this single subject into, I'm guessing, somewhere around 20 to 30 minutes. So kudos to the NFL, kudos to Amazon, kudos to ESPN, kudos for Fox, NBC for making us talk about it. Like you mentioned, we'll see as these teams get more set, and I'm sure it will be fine. Like you mentioned, we'll see how the chemistry concerns get worked out, but they're all great. All these personalities are great because they all put in the hard work like we're talking about.